While horror is a broad and varied genre, one theme that regularly plays a part is survival. Whether characters are facing a monster, an alien, or a masked maniac, the one thought running through their mind is whether they'll live to see another day. There are a slew of features that have nailed the survivor vibe, including Ravenous, The Descent, and A Quiet Place. However, there are a couple of films in this area of horror that never really got their due, regardless of their innovation and creativity. Even if you're a big fan of survival horror, there are bound to be a few entries on this list that you haven't got around to watching yet. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 survival horror movies you probably haven't seen. Number 10, Long Weekend. 1978's Long Weekend, not to be mistaken with the half-dozen other movies with the same name, centres around Peter and Marcia, a frustrated couple who go camping to forget about their troubles. Not only do the pair find themselves endlessly bickering, but they're relentlessly attacked by the local wildlife. Possums, birds, bugs, and the couple's own dog grow increasingly hostile, almost like they're attracted to Peter and Marcia's toxicity. Though it's custom for Mother Nature to be perceived as the villain in a natural horror flick, this isn't the case here. Peter and Marcia are needlessly selfish, to the point where it's challenging to root for them. Considering the two are stealing nest eggs, dumping litter, crashing into kangaroos, chopping down trees, and killing dugongs, it feels like poetic justice when nature fights back. It's also worth mentioning Long Weekend is a great example of show, don't tell. Rather than relying on exposition dumps, there are large stretches where the story is told visually, especially the final half hour, which is almost dialogue-free. Despite the fact wildlife attacks should be petrifying, Long Weekend is more entertaining than scary, since these unlikable characters get everything they deserve. Number 9, Alone. Alone is a straightforward cat-and-mouse story, with an unhinged man, Sam, harassing recent widow Jessica through the countryside. With that said, the minimalistic approach and bare-bones premise doesn't stop Alone from being nerve-wracking from beginning to end. The tension is through the roof from the opening, since it's clear Sam is a twisted son of a bitch thanks to Mark Menchaca's slimy performance. Despite the fact Jess's tormentor is rotten to the core, Sam is significantly scarier when he plays nice, since he can tap into his dark side at any given moment. Not only does Jules Wilcox give a visceral performance as Jess, it's refreshing to see a heroine in horror make every logical decision possible. For example, even though Sam behaves pleasantly at first, Jessica refuses to engage, sensing he has an ulterior motive. And when Sam's car supposedly breaks down, Jessica doesn't help him, believing it's a ruse to capture her. Alone doesn't reinvent the wheel by any stretch of the imagination, but the stripped-down thriller is sure to get pulses racing and hearts pounding. Number 8, Just Before Dawn. The slasher craze was in full swing during the 1970s and 80s, with serial-killing indies being churned out like there was no tomorrow. While mega hits like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, and Friday the 13th dominated the box office at the time, so many slashers got lost in the shuffle, including Just Before Dawn. Though many horrors of the time may seem tame by today's standards, Just Before Dawn doesn't fall into that category, as highlighted by it opening with a man being castrated with a serrated machete. So when the killer turns his attention to a bunch of campers soon after, things are already bone-chilling. Just Before Dawn is a slasher above all else, but there are times when it feels like a survivalist thriller in the same vein as Deliverance. The campers aren't just contending with their hiking pursuer, but also nature itself, as they have to avoid getting lost in the woods, falling from the cliffs, or drowning in the turbulent rivers. The acting isn't anything Oscar-worthy, but there's plenty of gore, imaginative kills, and a twist or two to keep everybody thoroughly enthralled. Number 7, Wilderness. In Wilderness, a group of juvenile prisoners are sent to an island for team-building exercises. Though the convicts have no intention of taking their stay seriously, they're forced to work together when a killer begins tracking them. This lot may be a little questionable, but it's hard not to be on their side since the mysterious antagonist does everything in his power to make them suffer. After watching the prisoners being set on fire, ensnared in bear traps, and eaten by dogs, sympathizing for them is guaranteed regardless of their sins. What keeps Wilderness engaging is how the dynamic between the characters keeps evolving. At first, the warden believes the inmates are responsible for the sicko's actions. The group initially acts hostile towards each other, but agrees to join forces, believing their chances of staying alive are better if they're unified. And when they start helping one another, it feels like they're not just trying to save themselves, but also find redemption. By the time the killer's motivation is finally revealed, the audience will look at the story in a very different light, which may encourage a rewatch. Number 6. Rogue. Greg McLean is renowned for directing gripping thrillers like Wolf Creek, The Belko Experiment, and Jungle. However, one entry on his CV that escaped many people's attention is Rogue. The creature feature follows Pete, a journalist on assignment in the Australian outback. While on a touring cruise, his boat is smashed by a 25-foot saltwater crocodile, trapping Pete's group in the swamp. And just to make matters worse, the area will be flooded by nightfall, giving the tourists no means to hide. As such, the tension is off the charts, even when the scaly man-eater is nowhere to be seen, since the ensemble has a limited time to get to safety. It's explained early on how dangerous the croc is, detailing how it can move at 20 miles per hour underwater without making a ripple, elevating the fear factor exponentially when things go to hell. Rogue has a surprisingly solid cast. The characters here are pretty one-note, but the ensemble gives it their all, making the impending danger more believable. Although Rogue failed to make a fifth of its budget back, the Aussie monster flick should have received a lot more hype. Number 5. The Hallow. In Corin Hardy's directorial debut, Adam and his family moved to the Irish countryside, hoping to start a new chapter in their lives. Over time, they realise they're not welcome, and not just by the locals. After having several supernatural encounters, Adam suspects he's being tormented by an ancient and sinister force. What makes the Hallow consistently scary is how there's nowhere our central characters can go where the great evil can't follow. Whether Adam is wandering through the woods, driving his car, or relaxing in his humble abode, the great evil keeps finding him and his family. The Hallow also does an incredible job of switching and combining genres, juggling body horror, fantasy, thriller, and folk horror with ease. Also, anyone unfamiliar with Irish fables is sure to be in for a rude awakening. Although mythological creatures from the Emerald Isle are usually depicted as cute and cuddly, the Hallow perfectly demonstrates how utterly terrifying Celtic lore can be. Added to that, the entire situation is more unnerving since it's uncertain what the threat actually is. Even though Adam repeatedly proves to be resourceful and adaptable, the fact he doesn't know what he's up against elevates the scares. Number 4. Frozen. Rather than being hunted by a chainsaw-wielding cannibal or a masked lunatic, Adam Green's chilly thriller Frozen has its characters face off against something far more dangerous: sub-zero temperature. When skiers Parker, Joe, and Dan find themselves trapped on a ski lift during a snowstorm, they need to find a way to escape before freezing to death. Conceptually, watching 3 people shivering on a chairlift for 90 minutes could be boring. Fortunately, Frozen finds clever scenarios to keep things engaging. For example, when Parker leans on a steel bar, her hand fuses with the icy metal, forcing her to rip the skin off her palm to free herself. After some bolts become loose, the group realise it's only a matter of time before they plummet below. And even if they survive the fall, the local wolves will make short work of them. Though the actors are on top form, it's Frozen's sound effects that sell how bitterly cold it is. No matter what the characters are doing, the chattering of teeth, the cracking of ice, and the crunching of snow can be heard as a constant reminder of what these poor souls are enduring. Number 3. Backcountry. Loosely based on a true story, Backcountry follows an urban couple, Alex and Jen, who get lost in the Blackfoot Trail. With no supplies or phone, Alex and Jen find themselves in a hopeless situation, and just when it feels like things couldn't get any worse, the pair learn they're being followed by a hungry black bear. Unsurprisingly, the extreme circumstances create a major conflict between the two, causing Alex and Jen to blame one another. However, tension is high from the beginning since it's obvious the relationship was on the rocks before they set foot in the woods. The two leads are so natural while trading barbs, it genuinely looks like they're not acting. Watching the two making passive-aggressive jabs at each other is so entertaining, it's easy to momentarily forget there's a bear nearby, which makes it more shocking when the 600-pound carnivore lumbers on screen. The bear itself rarely appears, but is built up early on, so there's a permanent sense of dread that is sure to leave anyone on the edge of their seat. Number 2. What Keeps You Alive? What Keeps You Alive opens with Jackie and Jules celebrating their first anniversary in an isolated cabin. Unfortunately, the romantic weekend is cut short when Jackie inexplicably pushes her wife off a cliff, leaving Jules severely injured and lost in the woods. This psychological horror stands out amongst others since it effectively plays around with character traits. Even though Jackie's the villain, she fits the final girl trope to a T, since she's a charismatic badass and an excellent shot with a rifle. Jules, on the other hand, initially comes across as a total wimp. However, the fact Jules lacks determination makes it more satisfying when she finds her inner strength, allowing her to take on the final girl mantle. But even when Jules is out of the woods, she's ironically not out of the woods yet, since she still must contend with the so-called love of her life. Although What Keeps You Alive could have turned into a traditional slasher at this point, it finds creative ways to keep the scares coming without feeling derivative or trite. What really makes this film work is Hannah Emily Anderson's performance as Jackie, with the actress oozing charm in every scene despite being a cookie-cutter baddie. The way she switches from being the innocent wifey to a cold-blooded sociopath in a heartbeat is fascinating. Rather than acting like a deranged maniac, Anderson portrays the character with calm acceptance, which makes her all the more menacing. Considering Jackie is one of the most mesmerizing horror villainesses of the last decade, What Keeps You Alive should have gotten a lot more recognition. Number 1. Saloum. In Jean-Luc Herbelot's second feature, 3 African mercenaries are forced to abandon their mission and take refuge in an isolated resort. When a local recognizes the mercs, the trio has to make drastic decisions to stay alive. As brutal as Saloum is, the Senegalese-French feature feels like a war drama for the most part. But 2/3 in, a huge dollop of horror is thrown into the mix, with the soldiers inexplicably chased by a supernatural swarm. Blending genres like this can be jarring, but the way Saloum merges real-life tragedies with African folklore works in the story's favor. The first hour is grounded in reality, making it more unexpected and frightening when the paranormal elements are introduced. Saloum is rife with horror tropes, but each of them is twisted on its head, making these archetypal ideas feel fresh and new. The 3 leads are anything but angels, but they're all likable in their own way, making it easier to empathize with them when things turn nasty. Even though Saloum was universally praised, won awards, and received a worldwide release, it remains mostly unknown. But since the crime monster flick has found a home on Shudder, now is the perfect time to check out this underrated gem.